that wonderful youth choir such a great hand to give them spirit. That's important because we always have to keep in mind that these young people need our encouragement. And if they're getting us in that kind of good spirit at their age, imagine what the greatness they're going to do once they get older. So let's give them another hand. Now, it's really an honor to be up here in Awendaw. This is where my father's people were from. My great-grandmother was Pinckney, as a matter of fact. So I'm sure I'm related to a large portion of this audience. But in either case, though, I take our text today from, one more thing before I get started. If you want to, you feel free to live stream this or record this, especially for your children, because you're about to hear some things that they are not going to hear in the classroom. So you might want to preserve what you're about to hear right now, okay? Now, having said all of that, we take our text this morning from the book of Proverbs, 23rd chapter, 7th verse, which teaches us, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Eat and drink, saith he to thee. Look, but his heart is not yet with thee." And what, in other words, you are what you think you are. That matters. You see, today we're celebrating here not only the founder of our denomination, Black History Month, but the founder of our denomination, the great Bishop Richard Allen. He was born in slavery in Philadelphia. Yes, they had slavery in the North too, up till 1827. I'll get to that in a little bit. But on Valentine's Day, 1760, he was born and sold to Delaware. Fortunately, he was sold to a man who was relatively decent, named Stokely Sturgis, who allowed him to work side jobs to purchase his freedom, as well as read and write. He went to Philadelphia to learn to read and preach the gospel. And his most famous episode of this period took place in the St. George Methodist Episcopal Church. They were giving communion to the white members. And being that he felt that he was a member of the body of Christ, he and a man named Absalom Jones went up to the altar to take communion. And they're like, what are y'all doing here? Mm-hmm. Well, we're here to take communion. See, look here. Y'all don't get this. See, the colored people, they take their communion after the white folks. But Richard Allen, being the educated man that he was, said, "But sir, in Christ there is no male nor female, nor Jew nor Greek." And I'm sure that if he was saying this at that time, he would have said, "Nor white nor colored." Yes, that's right. But in either case, though, they tried to pull him off of the altar, but he grabbed on and refused to leave. Until then, finally, he left. But he would not degrade himself by taking the communion later. He and Absalom Jones led them out of that St. George Methodist Episcopal Church. And a couple of years later, they started the Mother Bethel African Church in Philadelphia. And that was the foundation of AME Church. But not only was Brother Allen the founder of our denomination, he was also the first African-American leader to speak out and act on behalf of the rights of our people. He also built schools, the African Society for the Education of the Youth. Why? Because, as he said in a sermon in 1827, it is said by the Southern slaveholders that the more ignorant they could bring out the slaves, the better slaves they could make. Let that sink in for a moment. Amen. All right? Now, in one of his bold voices early on, he gave a eulogy to George Washington that was published in the newspapers of Philadelphia after our first president died. And he said something interesting about that. He said that in Washington freeing his own slaves in his will, he said he wiped away the only stain in which man could ever reproach him. And in a sermon to slaveholders that he gave, he said these bold words. He said, "When you are pleaded with, do not reply as Pharaoh did to Moses. we wish you to consider that God himself was the first pleader of the cause of the slaves. So if you love your children, if you love your country, and if you love the God of love, clear your land from slavery.
Amen. Amen.
Now, remember what I said earlier about they were being slavery in the North for a while. Here's what a lot of people don't know. In Boston, Massachusetts, there was this bold lady by the name of Mama Beck, who heard these people in Boston, Massachusetts reading from these documents, saying things like about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all men are created equal. And she said, wait a minute. If they're saying that, talking about life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness and all men are created equal, what about me? Last time I checked, I was human. So she got a lawyer named Sedgwick and sued for her freedom. And the courts in Massachusetts ruled that since she applied under the heading of all men are created equal, she was hereby free. So after that, she declared that she was no longer Mom Bet, but Elizabeth Freeman, to celebrate her status.
Amen.
And let me add something else to that too. This was the case that led to the eventual end of slavery in the North, which is why you don't hear about it today. But also, get this. Mom Bet never went to school or read a day in her life, and she could not read one letter out of the alphabet.
Amen.
But as she thought, so was she. She thought that she could do better than what she did, and she acted upon it.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's why that's important.
Amen.
Now, to take things a little further down here, I noticed in your program this morning, you had a picture of Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne. Did you know that he was from right here in the Charleston area? Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne had a school for slave and free children over on 125 Tradd Street in downtown Charleston. But after our bold AME brother, Denmark Beasley, tried to start a slave rebellion in 1822, based on his reading of Exodus 21:16 that said, he that stealeth a man and selleth him shall be put to death. And Revelation 13:10, he that leadeth into captivity shall be led into captivity. Y'all don't hear that very often. They made it illegal for African Americans to read and write during slavery after that. But did Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne say, oh, well, that's it, I might as well give up? No. He went to Wilberforce, Ohio, and started Wilberforce University, which was the first black college in America run by black people. Again, let that sink in.
Amen.
Now, in saying all of this, it's important to understand how it got like this in the first place. You see, after they brought the slave ships to America in 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia, on August 20th that year, 400 years this August, you had in America at that time a group of poor whites called the indentured servants. These poor whites were usually low-level, nonviolent criminals. They would work off their sentences for 7 years in slavery to wealthy white people. Then afterwards, they would get their freedom and property and all that. But according to our great brother, Dr. Henry Louis Gates, that has these wonderful documentaries on ETV, they seldom lived long enough to get that sentence taken care of. So the powers that be in Virginia had a problem. These poor indentured white servants and these enslaved blacks were getting along a little too well. And they said, what would happen if these two groups came together and overthrew us, against us? And so there was a poor white man named Nathaniel Bacon who tried to bring these enslaved blacks and these indentured whites together to overthrow the government of Virginia. But he died of dysentery. And the colonial government of Virginia said, whew, that was close. And they said, we can't let this happen again. So they put the blacks in a permanent position of slavery and illiteracy. and they elevated the poor whites above them to, think about this, divide and conquer the poor so that the rich could stay rich. Again, let that sink in.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's why you have a race problem in America.
Amen. Yes. Yes.
Now, having said that, do not get the impression by anything I say here today that I'm here telling you that all white folks are terrible. They weren't. There were many who spoke up and did on our behalf. Right here in Charleston, they had the great Judge Julius Wakees Waring over on Meeting Street, who ruled in favor of African Americans voting in South Carolina and having equal schools and the right as well as the right to sit anywhere they wanted in his courtroom and so forth, until he was forced to retire and run out of town in 1952. There was a lady by the name of Viola Liuzzo from Detroit, Michigan, who came down in Selma, Alabama to help with Martin Luther King and was shot to death by the Ku Klux Klan. And when I was in Selma, Alabama, they had the marker to her. When I was there in 1998, the Klan spray painted a Confederate flag on her marker. But the black community of Selma marched to that marker, cleaned that off, and put a fence around that marker so no one would deface the memory of their sister again. And these are things you need to know. So, now, all the people that I described had one thing in common. They all believed that they were more than what life said that they were in front of them at the time. Again, as you thinketh in your heart, so are you. So that leads us today. We are living in a time of mass ignorance and confusion. I have to be honest. You have these foolish people out there who, as the book of 2 Timothy in the 4th chapter teaches us, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and shall be turned into fables. And one of the worst places that you can find that today is one of the worst places where people get wrong information, and that is social media. You have these false memes going around giving false history. You have these people who are going around misleading our youth. They call themselves woke. But I'm here to tell you, folks, of years of teaching, a lot of these so-called woke folks are nothing but jokes. Amen. Because they're telling our young people things like Jesus was a made-up character and that Christianity is the white man's religion. Hold up. If you look throughout the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New, you see 2 Kings 19, 9th chapter, that teaches us of an Ethiopian king named Taharka. You look at Acts 8:27, where it talks about Queen Candace of Ethiopia. You look at Psalms 68th chapter, 31st verse, that teaches us that princes shall come from Egypt, and Ethiopia shall stretch her hands before God. Now let me ask you something, ladies and gentlemen. Where is Ethiopia? What continent? Now wait a minute now. This is going to be on YouTube, so I want to make sure they hear this. Where is Ethiopia? Africa. Thank you. Now, if Christianity is the white man's religion, and throughout the Bible they're talking about Ethiopia, somebody didn't get the memo. Amen. So another thing we also have to consider about this is that if we want our children to do well, we have to plant the right seeds. You see, not too long ago, I was having lunch at the Hannibal Soul Food downtown. And a couple of these ministers I was having lunch with, they were going on and on about the young people. How the young people don't listen. How the young people listen that. And so I said, gentlemen, I have to ask you this. When you were 15 and 16 years old, and the old people tried to fill you with knowledge, did you listen? Right. They got kind of quiet then. And my point in that was that they may not listen now, but when you go out in the yard and you plant a seed, does that tree grow up right away? It takes time to grow and develop into something great. And we have to have that patience when we teach these young people. They're not going to get it right away, but you know what? You planted that seed, and you started something that's going to grow, and that's what counts. And in planting those seeds, the cultivation must be done correctly. I know a lot of times we get angry at our young people. Some years ago, one of my little nephews, he called himself with his hands behind his back at the table, trying to eat a jelly bread sandwich with just his mouth and making a mess. And you want to correct them where you don't tell them not to be dumb. You don't tell them to be dumb and stupid and all that, because when you, the person who is their first teacher, tells them that they're dumb and that they're stupid, that they're ignorant, or that you're going to be just like their daddy going to jail, or just going to be like their mother walking the streets, and they do exactly as you tell them, you wonder what happened. No, we have to think before we correct these young people. We got to let them know what good they can do. We got to build them up and not tear them down. And let me close by giving you a classic example of this. Back in 1969, 50 years ago, some of you might remember when Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin landed on the moon. And so the rocket ship splashed down off the coast of Hawaii. And President Richard Nixon came out there to greet the astronauts. There were large crowds of people that day to see these astronauts get out of that spaceship, and President Nixon awarded them. And one grandfather held his grandson on his shoulders. And the grandfather said to the grandson, "Son, this is what Americans can do if we put their mind to it. This is what you can do when you put your mind to it." And the young man heard this, and he internalized it. And he went on to defy a lot of odds when everybody did not believe in him. You're very familiar with him. His name was Barry at the time, but you know him today as former President Barack Hussein Obama. Again, as he thinketh, so is he. Now, another thing that Richard Allen said that I want to share with you. He said that the best way to reward a good leader and a good teacher is to take what they said and apply it to your lives to make yourself a better person. Now, many of us want the young people to know their history. And a lot of the schools don't have this in their classroom. And a lot of them are going to the wrong place on Facebook to get a lot of bad information. So what we have to do is encourage the young people that if the parents don't know, send the kids to the library. Let the librarian show them the writings of our great leaders, such as Fannie Lou Hamer, such as Martin Luther King, such as Charleston's own Esau Jenkins, such as Charleston's own Mrs. September Poinsett Clark, such as Coretta Scott King, such as Malcolm X, such as, of course, Bishop Richard Allen himself. And they take what they learn out of that and make it a part of their own lives. And that way, those are the seeds that will be planted to grow up into great oaks to give shelter and nourishment to us at a time when the nation seems to be sinking and declining into ignorance. These may be some of the very young people that pull us out of that. And if we do that, I can guarantee you that God is going to smile on us. And on that note, Thank you.